Hey guys, tonight we journey back to a time when royal feasts shimmered not just with candlelight, but with dozens, maybe hundreds, of gleaming mirrors propped up along polished walls. You shuffle along a marble floor slick enough to threaten your balance, robes brushing gold-gilded frames, 1,000 versions of yourself staring back from every direction. The air is heavy with roasted meats, wine, and a subtle scent of lavender oils. Laughter bubbles up around you, bouncing off glassy surfaces and swirling in dizzying echoes. But you already know something they don't. All of this glitter won't last. Not if the queen has her way. Because tonight's splendor is the very thing about to tip her over the edge. You might not survive this one. Imagine getting caught in a royal tantrum that redefines fashion for the next 50 years. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Always love knowing who's on the other end of the story. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're seated now at a long banquet table sagging under the weight of silver platters and porcelain goblets, light catching on every surface. The queen sits at the head, a glowering figure in layers of velvet so dark they seem to drink the very candlelight. Her jewels flash as she lifts a goblet to her lips, but the flash isn't what causes the room to fall silent. It's the way she sets it down, metal clanging sharply, so sharp it feels deliberate. She's not smiling. No, she's scanning the walls, the faces, the mirrors. You feel the tension before you understand it, like the air before a thunderstorm, hair prickling at your neck. Here's the thing about mirrors back then. They weren't your sleek IKEA vanity number. They were imperfect, wavy, speckled, distorting. More funhouse than Instagram filter. And in that imperfect shimmer, the queen has caught sight of something she finds unforgivable. Historians still argue whether it was a particularly bad angle or the cumulative exhaustion of being compared to younger, fresher faces that pushed her over the edge. Some say the mirror caught her mid-scowl, exaggerating every line and crease. Others whisper she spotted a courtier, young, beautiful, glowing, reflected near her, and saw, by comparison, the slow erosion of her own beauty. A mainstream fact here. Medieval queens were often judged as much by appearance as by political savvy. Their looks could be currency, alliance, even survival. To fade was to risk ridicule or worse, irrelevance. You chew on a mouthful of roast pheasant as the queen signals, a curt flick of her hand. Servants scurry. Mirrors are turned to face the wall. A few are whisked away entirely. The court, always quick to sniff the wind, follows suit, murmuring into sleeves, avoiding the queen's eyes. You can feel the shift, heavy and awkward. The feast limps along after that, as if the absence of reflections has drained not just the glamour but the appetite from the room. Platters grow cold. Wine goes untouched. And there she sits, the queen, a small, rigid mountain of velvet and discontent, watching her court squirm. You might say she's plotting, but that would suggest calculation. This looks more like something petty, bruised, and bitter, a personal vendetta against shiny surfaces. One courtier, bolder, or perhaps stupider, than most, tries to sneak a glance at a goblet's polished side. The queen notices. A single eyebrow arches. The courtier turns a shade paler than the linen napkins. Some say this moment, this minor, simmering humiliation, was the first spark. That by the time the candles guttered low and the plates were scraped clean, a new rule was already forming in the queen's mind. A world without mirrors. A world without comparisons. A world, perhaps, where only her chosen image could survive. You don't know it yet, but you're sitting in the middle of history being rewritten not by war or treaty, but by the bruised ego of a queen with a very personal grudge against her own reflection. You wake the next morning to a court buzzing like a kicked beehive. Servants dart past you, arms laden with velvet cloths and hastily scribbled proclamations. Courtiers whisper behind gloved hands. Something is happening, and you can feel it in the hurried footfalls and strained smiles. You trail after a group of them as they make their way to the great hall, where the queen is already perched upon her throne like a brooding gargoyle. She's dressed in deep green today, a jeweled net catching her hair into a careful cage. Beside her, the royal scribe holds a scroll so long it pools onto the floor. His quill trembles as he awaits her signal. With a sharp nod, she speaks, her voice slicing through the murmurs. Henceforth, the presence of mirrors within the palace is forbidden. Gasps ripple through the crowd like a breeze ruffling leaves. You see ladies clutch at their necklaces, men glance at the polished buckles on their shoes. Banned? All mirrors? You catch a glimmer of satisfaction flicker across the queen's face, a cat watching trapped mice. It's one thing to loathe your own reflection, It's another thing entirely to outlaw everyone else's too. A petty reason? Maybe. But what the queen wants, the queen gets. Historians still argue whether this was truly about beauty, or if deeper insecurities brewed beneath her jeweled exterior. Was it a way to level the playing field among ladies of the court, erasing beauty as a form of competition? Or was it simply a monarch flexing her unchecked power in the most personal of ways? Mainstream fact: mirrors in the medieval and Renaissance periods weren't common trinkets. They were expensive, treasured, and more likely to be found in the homes of the wealthy or in royal palaces. Owning one was a mark of status. Losing them? Well, that was more than a minor inconvenience, it was a social death. You wander the palace as the purge begins. Servants move with military precision, covered wagons rattling over cobblestones, laden with mirrors stacked like corpses. The palace walls, once gleaming, now look oddly flat and lifeless, draped in tapestries to cover the sudden gaps. The grand ballroom, once a hall of 1,000 reflections, becomes a shadow of itself. And it's not just the mirrors on walls and tables. Jewelry boxes, once inlaid with tiny mirrors for quick glances, are confiscated. Hand mirrors are smashed under heavy boots. Even the polished silverware is eyed suspiciously, anything that might cast an accidental reflection. You, wise enough to keep your mouth shut, observe the queen's closest advisors murmuring their approval. Whether genuine or fearful is hard to tell. After all, supporting her little vendetta might be safer than opposing it. The ripple effects are immediate and absurd. Ladies who once prided themselves on intricate hairstyles now avoid the elaborate, fearing to venture without the aid of a mirror. Men's tunics, once lavish and embroidered to dazzle under candlelight, grow drabber by the day. A quirky tidbit you overhear: one particularly vain courtier commissions a miniature portrait of himself, set on a locket, to serve as his mirror. He's caught almost immediately and the locket is destroyed with satisfying ceremony in front of the court. You can't help but wonder, was the queen herself happier now, in this mirrorless world she had created? Some say she grew more serene. Others claim she grew paranoid, suspicious of beauty she could no longer monitor or control. At court, though, no one dares to comment. Compliments become awkward. You look, well, as the new go-to, vague enough to survive the queen's scrutiny. Hair is braided blindly, dress is worn with mismatched fastenings, boots scuffed and unlaced. You, too, catch yourself in the habit of running a hand through your hair, only to pause. There's no reflection to check if you've made it worse. It's a court groping toward a future without mirrors, stumbling like a child learning to walk, terrified of the queen's gaze. And behind it all, the queen watches, smug, victorious, and perhaps just a little lonelier than before. You find yourself summoned, along with the rest of the court, to the throne room one blustery morning. Rumors have already spread like spilled ink. Whispers on the stairs, murmurs in the antechambers. The queen has escalated. You shuffle into place, candle flames bending in the drafty hall. The queen stands, not sits, today, which is already enough to make your stomach tighten. Her expression is carved in stone, her crown seeming to weigh heavier than usual on her brow. Beside her, displayed atop a velvet-draped pedestal, is the enemy, a single, oval mirror. Its edges are filigreed gold, delicate vines, and flowers curling around the glass. It's the kind of mirror that could cost a nobleman a year's income. And it's this very mirror that started it all. You watch as the queen, slow and deliberate, approaches it. For a moment, nothing happens. She simply stares, her back to the court. Then, with a speed that makes you flinch, she yanks a ceremonial sword from a guard's belt and, with a grunt, slashes the mirror from its stand. It falls, shattering against the cold stone floor, shards scattering like startled birds. The court gasps, but you stay silent, heart hammering. The queen turns back to you, eyes gleaming. "Let this be a lesson," she says. Vanity is a weakness. Reflection is a lie. Historians still argue whether this act was impulsive or meticulously staged. Was it rage or strategy? Was it a moment of personal triumph or a calculated display of dominance? You watch her closely, but even you can't tell. A mainstream fact: in those days, mirrors were more than tools. They were seen as symbols of wealth, yes, but also of self-knowledge and even sorcery. Some believed mirrors could trap souls, steal youth, invite misfortune. Breaking one wasn't just dramatic, it was an omen. 7 years bad luck, they said, even if you were a queen. But you're stuck on the simple truth: the queen has declared war on her own reflection. Later, as you pick your way across the throne room, careful to avoid the shards, you catch sight of a piece no bigger than your palm. Curiosity gets the better of you. You risk a glance. What you see makes your breath hitch, not your face exactly, but a warped version, distorted by cracks like spiderwebs. You quickly drop it. In the days that follow, the ban deepens. Not just mirrors, but any reflective surface that dares hint at a face, polished metal, still water in fountain basins, even glossy tiles. Courtiers, once peacocks in embroidered silks and jewels, now resemble damp sparrows, colorless and subdued. A quirky tidbit: one noblewoman, desperate to perfect her makeup, trains her pet falcon to sit facing her while she works, using the gleam in its eyes as her guide. Historians still chuckle over whether it was vanity or desperation, but most agree it didn't end well. The falcon eventually pecked at her rouge pot and ruined the entire affair. And the queen? She seems, strangely, both calmer and more severe. You notice how often she avoids direct eye contact now, how she gazes into the distance when she speaks. As if, without reflections to ground her, she's begun to float somewhere you can't quite follow. At night, when the castle settles into uneasy sleep, you sometimes wonder if she dreams of mirrors, of 1,000 fractured versions of herself staring back. But dreams are dangerous things here. You pull the covers higher and squeeze your eyes shut. You're trudging now through the palace corridors, noticing the grim toll the queen's vendetta has begun to take. Once vibrant tapestries sag with mildew where mirrors once gleamed, and the scent of lavender has given way to something mustier, like old parchment and damp wool. Without reflections, the palace feels oddly flattened, as though part of its soul has been scraped away. Today's lesson, however, isn't just about the queen, it's about beauty itself. Because as you dodge another servant scuttling past with an armful of confiscated silver, you realize, in this world, beauty isn't just skin deep. It's power. And it's fragile. You eavesdrop near the great library, catching the tail end of a lecture by the royal tutor. He's explaining medieval beauty standards to a group of bored young courtiers. You can't help but lean closer. Turns out, in the queen's time, beauty wasn't just a matter of pretty faces. It was tied to morality. A flawless complexion was a sign of a pure soul. Physical deformities, they thought, revealed internal corruption. Symmetry was everything. Even the church weighed in, suggesting that outer beauty reflected divine favor. A mainstream fact, served cold, portraits from the era show us that beauty ideals were brutally strict. High foreheads, pale skin, even if you had to dust yourself with lead, tiny rosebud mouths. No pressure, right? Without mirrors, though, those standards crumble fast. You catch glimpses of it everywhere. A lady-in-waiting stumbles into a room, her cheeks smeared with rouge and haphazard blotches. A duke struts through the halls, oblivious to the massive tear in the back of his hose. You even spot a knight with 2 different boots on, both left-footed. Historians still argue whether this downfall in personal upkeep was intentional on the queen's part or just an unfortunate side effect. Some say she wanted to level the playing field. Others whisper it was simply collateral damage from a royal temper tantrum. A quirky tidbit: one desperate noblewoman is said to have sat for hours in front of a polished silver shield, tilting it back and forth to catch enough of her reflection to do her hair. The shield was promptly confiscated. She wept for days, not over her appearance, but over the fine she was forced to pay, 3 months' rent for a shield she didn't even own. You pass a window, thick with grime from weeks of neglect. Even the glass panes have been forbidden from cleaning, no polished surfaces allowed. The world outside is just a blur, trees and sky smeared together like paint left out in the rain. In the queen's inner chambers, the ban is absolute. Her ladies dress her by memory, layering velvet gowns and fastening heavy necklaces by feel. Sometimes, you hear muffled sobs behind the thick oak doors, but they are quickly silenced. No one dares to speak of mistakes. And the queen? She strides through it all, a figure of unbending will. Without mirrors, she's beyond comparison, beyond criticism. Or so she must believe. You notice, though, how she touches her face more now, fingers tracing the lines she can no longer see but surely feels. Once, late at night, you pass her chamber and glimpse her through a crack in the door, sitting utterly still, staring into a blank, dark fireplace. You wonder, what does a queen see when she has no reflection? A world without mirrors is a world adrift. Beauty standards, once so rigid, begin to blur, much like the images hidden behind the grime-streaked windows. Faces grow softer in memory, imperfections forgiven by distance. Maybe that's the queen's secret hope, that without mirrors, the cruel gaze of others, and of herself, will simply fade away. But as you pull your cloak tighter and move on, you can't shake the feeling that some reflections never truly vanish. They just hide in the dark corners, waiting. You wander deeper into the labyrinth of the palace, your footsteps muffled by worn tapestries and dusty rushes scattered across the stone floors. It's not just the hallways that feel emptier now, the very air seems thinner, as though the absence of mirrors has sucked some essential liveliness from the place. You come to a halt before an ornate, towering door, a door you've never dared open before. Today, though, curiosity tugs at you. After a cautious glance around, you nudge it open and step inside. You're immediately hit with a smell both sour and metallic. The room is dark, save for a few guttering candles. In their flickering light, you spot curious shapes, reflective surfaces hidden under heavy cloths, their outlines betraying the forbidden glass beneath. This, you realize, must have once been the palace's mirror room, a showcase of wealth and wonder. You tiptoe forward, brushing against velvet drapes and hearing the faintest clink of glass behind them. Once, these mirrors would have dazzled visiting dignitaries and local lords alike, a demonstration of the Queen's power. But not anymore. The Queen wasn't the first to distrust mirrors. You recall what you've heard in whispered lessons. Medieval superstition painted mirrors as dangerous. Portals to other worlds, traps for unwary souls, even tools for black magic. There were murmurs that reflections could steal your essence, or that evil could slip through the glass when no one was watching. A mainstream fact, in many cultures, covering mirrors during times of death was common practice, to prevent souls from being trapped inside. Mirrors were less decoration and more supernatural hazard, depending on whom you asked. Historians still argue whether the Queen leaned into these superstitions intentionally to justify her mirror purge, or whether she herself feared what she saw. Some claim her mother, a stern woman known for her dabbling in the occult, instilled a deep-rooted suspicion of mirrors in her from a young age. A quirky tidbit, in some corners of the kingdom, peasants took the Queen's decree as gospel and went one step further, burying their mirrors in graveyards or tossing them into rivers at midnight to free trapped spirits. You shiver. The cloth-covered mirrors seem to loom in the candlelight, whispering secrets you can almost hear if you listen too long. In the center of the room stands one mirror left uncovered, forgotten perhaps in the hurry to obey the Queen's command. It's cracked straight down the middle, creating two fractured versions of the world. You move closer, heart hammering in your chest. You catch a glimpse of yourself, a split image. On one side, your reflection seems almost normal. On the other, it's twisted, elongated, monstrous. You jerk back, bumping into a table and sending a candlestick clattering to the ground. The noise echoes in the silence like a gunshot. You freeze, waiting, but no one comes. You leave the mirror room with your skin crawling, the candle flames behind you sputtering as if in warning. Outside, the palace feels colder. You pass a cluster of courtiers huddled together, whispering furiously. They're trading stories now, old legends dressed up as gossip, tales of mirrors that show the future, mirrors that speak, mirrors that curse. Without their daily reflections, their imaginations have turned inward, conjuring fears from the shadows. It's funny, you think. Ban the mirrors, and the mind makes its own. And all the while, the Queen sits high on her throne, unbothered. Or so she appears. No one knows for sure, because without mirrors, even she can't confirm her own visage. You wonder, has she forgotten what she looks like? Or worse, has she started imagining, too? You find yourself drifting toward the royal courtyard, where the crisp air bites at your cheeks and the last stubborn leaves cling to skeletal branches. It's quieter here, but not empty. A small group of servants gathers furtively near the hedges, heads bent close in urgent conversation. You edge closer, careful not to snap a twig or crunch a leaf underfoot. They're whispering about the latest royal command. Every mirror, not just in the palace but across the kingdom, must be destroyed or surrendered. The decree has spilled beyond castle walls like an ink blot on parchment. And so begins the Great Reflection Revolution. The news spreads like wildfire. Merchants groan as they wrap up hand mirrors and polish steel trays in cloth and cart them away. Wealthy households scramble to strip mirrored panels from their parlor walls. Even churches are ordered to cover up any reflective surfaces, lest the Queen's wrath extend to them. Mainstream fact, edicts like this weren't unheard of. Monarchs often extended their whims beyond their immediate surroundings. Sumptuary laws, those bizarre rules about who could wear what fabrics or colors, already controlled appearances. So a kingdom-wide mirror ban? Odd, yes, but not impossible. Historians still argue whether the Queen intended this chaos, or whether her advisors simply overcompensated, desperate to stay in her good graces. Some scholars suggest it was a calculated move to distract the people from a faltering economy. Others believe it was raw, unfiltered pettiness. You follow the wave of panic into town, where windows are being hastily shuttered and tinsmiths work overtime dulling their wares. Tailors scramble to produce clothing without shiny buttons. Even the local barbers are panicking, How are they supposed to cut hair straight without a looking glass? A quirky tidbit, a barber in the capital reportedly tried cutting hair by candle reflection in water. It ended with one nobleman so hideously trimmed that he began wearing a hat indoors and out, claiming a rare scalp condition. You wander past a cluster of townsfolk haggling over what to do with their forbidden mirrors. Some suggest hiding them in cellars, others talk nervously about burying them deep in the woods. You spot a boy trying to smash a mirror with a rock, wincing as shards leap up at him like angry sprites. Black markets sprout overnight. Shady dealers whisper from alleyways, offering tiny, secret mirrors no bigger than a coin, hidden in lockets or the backs of brooches. You even hear a rumor, no doubt exaggerated, of a secret society of mirror keepers meeting under the cover of darkness, preserving reflections for future generations. Of course, the penalties are harsh. The Queen's men patrol the streets, issuing fines heavy enough to bankrupt a merchant and dragging repeat offenders before the royal court. Public shaming is the new sport, parading those caught with mirrors through the market square, their precious glass trodden underfoot. You watch one such scene unfold, a woman sobbing as her ornate Venetian mirror, likely worth a fortune, is smashed to pieces with a hammer. She clutches the frame afterward like a widow mourning her spouse. The Queen, meanwhile, remains secluded in her palace, issuing edicts and trusting that her will is being carried out. You wonder if she has any idea what her decree has done to her people's daily lives, or if she simply doesn't care. There's a grim efficiency to it all, as if the kingdom is being polished, not to a gleam, but to a dull, somber patina. Shiny things are suspect now. Plainness is virtue. You're careful yourself, checking your boots for stray gleams, keeping your belt buckle dull unscratched. And in the evenings, by the low firelight of a mirrorless inn, the townsfolk tell ghost stories about the days when mirrors were common, tales of enchanted glass and reflective curses. It's as if, in banning mirrors, the Queen has not rid the world of their power, but only made it more fearsome. The kingdom, once a place of color and pomp, is growing grayer, stranger. And deep in the palace, the Queen smiles in the dark. You're summoned back to the palace sooner than you'd like, dragged from your cot at dawn by a pale-faced pageboy whose only explanation is a whispered, "She's changing the dress codes." You dress quickly, slapping on the plainest, least reflective things you own, and hurry through the mist-choked streets toward the looming gates. Inside, the court is already assembling, a human sea of drabness. Gone are the ruby brocades and sapphire satins, replaced by browns, grays, and muddy greens. Even jewelry is scarce, no polished gems, no gleaming chains. You spot one daring fool wearing a silver ring and watch the Queen's gaze latch onto him like a hawk on a field mouse. He quickly tugs it off and hides it in his pocket. At the center of it all, the Queen rises from her throne, draped in layers of matte black velvet, a crown deliberately dulled until it resembles a tarnished relic. Her voice cuts through the hushed crowd. From this day forth, appearance shall be no measure of worth. A noble sentiment, if you can forget the petty reason behind it. The new dress codes are read aloud by a trembling herald. No fabrics that gleam. No metal adornments unless dulled. No hairpins. No buckles. No polished boots. Even the Queen's knights are to wear armor sanded to a lifeless gray. Anything that catches the light is to be discarded or, worse, destroyed. Mainstream fact. Sumptuary laws in medieval Europe weren't unusual. Monarchs used them to control displays of wealth, enforce social hierarchies, and, let's be honest, remind the lower classes who was boss. But this is sumptuary law weaponized by personal vendetta. Historians still argue whether the Queen genuinely believed in these restrictions or merely used them as a cover to enforce her own discomfort on an entire kingdom. Some call it a political masterstroke, others, the most extravagant temper tantrum in recorded history. A quirky tidbit, some desperate nobles reportedly started dusting themselves with fine ash to achieve a properly dull, non-shiny complexion. One countess even invented a fashion for morning beauty, painting her cheeks with soot instead of rouge. It caught on for about 2 weeks before everyone decided they looked absolutely ghastly. You watch the court shuffle awkwardly as the new edicts sink in. There's a certain tragic comedy to it. Lords trip over hems too long to have been properly tailored without mirrors. Ladies stumble under the weight of heavy, unadorned dresses that hide any hint of figure or grace. The Queen, of course, appears entirely pleased. She surveys the room with the satisfied air of a chess master who's just removed every knight, bishop, and queen from her opponent's side. And it's not just appearance she's controlling now, it's behavior. Courtiers begin adopting a new way of standing, of speaking. No grand flourishes, no exaggerated bows. Everything is understated, muted, cautious. Compliments are stilted and safe. Your demeanor is most appropriate today. The palace has become a drab theater where everyone plays their part, terrified to outshine their queen, not just metaphorically, but literally. You slink back to your modest chamber that night, pulling the heavy shutters closed against the moonlight. As you lie in bed, you realize the real casualty isn't the mirrors, or the jewels, or even the fabrics. It's joy. The simple pleasure of catching your reflection, of admiring a bit of sparkle, of smiling at your own face. Without it, the kingdom feels hollow, drained of color and life. And yet, you can't help but wonder, if everyone looks dull, if everyone looks the same, doesn't that make the queen, even in her dulled crown and velvet gowns, stand out more? Maybe that was her plan all along. You find yourself creeping through the palace kitchens one evening, where the smell of baking bread and roasted meat lingers thick in the air. Servants bustle around, heads bowed, hands busy, but not too busy to gossip in hushed tones. Tonight's whisper is different. It's not about the latest decree or the queen's sour moods. It's about the mirror smugglers. You perk up, lingering by a stack of flour sacks to listen better. The black market for mirrors, it turns out, is booming. Despite the queen's sweeping bans and brutal punishments, demand for forbidden reflections only grows. A vanity outlawed is still a vanity deeply craved. You hear stories of secret trade routes winding through forests and the long-hidden riverbanks, merchants risking life and fortune to ferry delicate Venetian glass across borders. Smugglers hide mirrors in false-bottomed carts, behind bolts of drab fabric, even inside hollowed-out loaves of bread. The glass is thin, curved, polished to a smoky gleam, not perfect, but perfect enough for a glimpse. Mainstream fact: Venetian glassmakers, particularly those from the island of Murano, were world-renowned during the Renaissance. Their mirrors were considered the finest, clear and true at a time when most mirrors distorted and darkened reflections. Smuggling them into a mirror-banned kingdom? Highly risky, and highly profitable. Historians still argue whether these smugglers were merely profit-driven opportunists or brave resistors standing against the queen's petty tyranny. Some chroniclers paint them as folk heroes, others as shadowy criminals exploiting vanity for gain. You slip out of the kitchen and head toward the market quarter, curiosity gnawing at you. Night has fallen, and the streets are slick with recent rain, the cobblestones gleaming in the faint light of covered lanterns. You spot him, a man with a wide-brimmed hat pulled low and a cart covered in potatoes. He whistles a jaunty tune as he ambles along, looking for all the world like any other vendor. But when he catches your eye, he gives the barest nod toward a nearby alley. You follow. Under the cover of darkness, he lifts a cloth to reveal his treasure, tiny mirrors, no bigger than a child's palm, their surfaces dulled with soot to appear harmless at a glance. He picks one up, wipes it gently on his sleeve, and suddenly there it is, your face, wobbly and blurred but unmistakably yours. You feel your breath hitch. It's been weeks since you've seen yourself. The smuggler grins, revealing a few missing teeth. First glance is free, he rasps. Second one'll cost you. You're tempted, achingly tempted, but you think of the penalties. Heavy fines. Public shaming. Worse, if the queen feels particularly slighted. A quirky tidbit: one legend claims a noblewoman once smuggled a mirror into a royal feast sewn inside her gown's lining. She would sneak glances by pulling the fabric taut over her lap during dinner. Unfortunately, the mirror cracked under the pressure, and the sound gave her away. She spent 3 months in a damp cell for her trouble, and the gown was burned. You slip a coin into the smuggler's hand anyway, quick and furtive, and accept the small mirror wrapped in rough cloth. You tuck it deep into your sleeve, heart thudding against your ribs. As you make your way back to the palace, you can't resist. In a shadowed doorway, you unwrap the mirror and lift it, just for a moment. There you are. Tired, wind-ruffled, and pale, but undeniably you. You hadn't realized how much you missed yourself until now. Carefully, you wrap the mirror again and hide it away. Around you, the kingdom staggers on, dulled and fearful. But in pockets and hidden drawers, mirrors gleam in secret, defying the queen's decree. Not with open rebellion, no banners, no battles, but with the quiet, persistent refusal to forget what their faces look like. You drift through the palace gardens the next morning, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and withering roses. The queen's latest obsession has taken hold, and you're curious to see it for yourself. She has commanded a replacement for the lost mirrors, something she can control. Portraits. Where mirrors once gleamed in gilded frames, you now find paintings. Not just a few grand oil canvases as in times past, but dozens, hundreds. Every hallway, Every antechamber, every alcove now hosts a likeness of the queen. And not just any likeness. These are improvements. You pause before one painting, the queen, rendered with flawless, unlined skin, hair gleaming like polished mahogany, eyes like twin sapphires. It's a masterwork of flattery. A queen not as she is, but as she wishes to be. Mainstream fact: in an age without photography, royal portraits were powerful political tools. Monarchs used them to project strength, beauty, piety, even when reality didn't quite measure up. Artists were expected to enhance their subjects' best features, sometimes drastically. Historians still argue whether the queen commissioned these portraits purely out of vanity, or whether she understood the deeper value of controlling her image in a kingdom suddenly deprived of reflections. Was this personal pettiness or brilliant propaganda? You trail your fingers lightly along the frame, catching whispers from passing courtiers. They mutter about how the queen now demands a new portrait every month, each one slightly different, more radiant, more ageless, more untouchable. A quirky tidbit: a painter, desperate to impress her, once depicted the queen surrounded by cherubs in golden light, holding a mirror that reflected not her face but a literal sun. She laughed once, just once, and commissioned 3 more paintings from him. But not every artist is pleased with this arrangement. You hear tales of painters fleeing the palace, unwilling to sacrifice their integrity. Others stay, some for the money, some for fear. You even overhear one sour old artist grumble that painting the queen is like painting smoke, forever changing, never satisfied. You walk further and find a massive canvas, nearly the height of the throne room. The queen again, this time in armor, hair billowing dramatically, sword raised against some unseen foe. Beneath it, a trembling artist touches up the highlights on her armor with meticulous care. You can't help but smirk. The queen, who banned mirrors for exposing too much truth, now demands an army of brushstrokes to manufacture a more pleasing fiction. There's something ironic about it. She has replaced the honest, if unkind, reflection of a mirror with curated, impossible images. Perhaps she believes these painted versions will endure longer than her mortal self. Perhaps she's right. But as you stand there, watching servants carry yet another frame through the garden gates, you wonder, without mirrors, without real reflections, how much of herself does the queen truly remember? A single portrait catches your eye, a half-finished work abandoned in the grass. This queen looks different. Tired. Eyes shadowed. Hair streaked with gray. Lines etched deep around her mouth and brow. It's unfinished, and perhaps that's why it feels truer than all the others. You glance around. No one seems to notice it lying there, the honest face among the flatteries. You hesitate, then carefully flip the canvas face down, hiding it from view. Better to leave it undiscovered. For now. As you step back toward the palace, the late afternoon sun casts long shadows. You catch your reflection in a puddle, blurred, broken by ripples, but still real. You wonder how long it will be before even puddles are declared illegal. In the Queen's kingdom, reality itself is on borrowed time. You slink back inside the palace, your boots muffled against the rush-strewn floors. Word has spread quickly. The Queen is demanding fresh portraits from every artist she can summon, and they're already cracking under the pressure. You can almost smell the panic in the air, thick and sour. Today, you linger near the Queen's private salon, a room where light barely filters through the heavy velvet drapes. You tuck yourself into a shadowed corner as yet another trembling painter is ushered inside. The poor man carries a bundle of brushes and a palette smeared with hopeful colors. He bows deeply, nearly dropping the whole mess. The Queen gestures lazily toward the chair set up at the far end of the room. He scuttles over, pulling out a blank canvas, dabbing nervously at it. You watch the process unfold. At first, he paints quickly, broad strokes shaping the familiar silhouette, the high forehead, the sharp cheekbones, the long nose. But you see the hesitation creep in as he starts to work on the details. The Queen watches him like a hawk, motionless but for her eyes. He catches her gaze, falters, and hastily softens a wrinkle, lifts the jawline, erases a shadow beneath her eye. Mainstream fact: Renaissance artists were often at the mercy of their patrons, especially royal ones. Displease a king or queen, and your career, or your life, could end very abruptly. Flattery wasn't just a choice, it was survival. Historians still argue whether the Queen's ever-evolving portraits reflected her growing delusion or a conscious performance. Was she simply lost in self-deception? Or did she understand, all too well, that an image, no matter how false, could could shape memory, legacy, even history itself? A quirky tidbit: one painter, desperate to avoid the Queen's wrath, reportedly invented an early form of soft focus painting, deliberately blurring features just enough to disguise flaws without erasing them entirely. It worked. He became her favorite portraitist for 3 years straight. The painter before you seems less lucky. As he layers color over color, you see his hands shake. The mouth he paints is too stern, the brow too furrowed. He notices too late. The Queen's voice cuts through the stillness like a blade. That will be enough. He stammers an apology, but she merely waves a hand. 2 guards step forward, guiding him out with surprising gentleness. His painting is left behind, half-finished, a ghostly twin of the Queen staring bleakly from the canvas. You slip closer when the room empties, studying the portrait. Up close, it's even more unsettling. Without the lacquer of flattery, the Queen's face seems hollowed out by time. Not ugly, no, but human. Mortal. You wonder if she sees that, if that's what truly frightens her. Because here's the secret no one says aloud: mirrors may reflect reality, but so do faces. The courtiers, the servants, the artists, each one is a mirror of sorts, reflecting the Queen back to herself through their reactions, their deference, their fear. And in this palace of drab fabrics and muted voices, those human mirrors have gone dark, too. No smiles, no laughter, no spontaneous joy. Only careful, calculated obedience. You drift from the room, the image of the unfinished portrait lingering behind your eyes. Outside, in the long, cold halls, more paintings are hung, each one slightly less real than the last. It's a hall of illusions now, a funhouse without fun. You pass a servant polishing a candlestick to a dull, lifeless sheen. Even the flames in the sconces seem dimmer these days. As you move deeper into the palace, you realize something chilling. The Queen hasn't just banned mirrors. She's banned truth. And the scariest part? It's working. You step carefully into the bustling city beyond the palace walls, the cold stone streets alive with the uneasy murmur of people adjusting to a mirrorless existence. It's one thing for a queen to impose her whims within her gilded cage, but out here, among the cobblers and fishmongers, the decree has become something much stranger. No more polished shop signs or gleaming lanterns. Even puddles are disrupted by children tossing stones or sloshing buckets of water, as if trained to fear their own reflections. You sidestep a woman frantically buffing the shine from a pie case with a grimy rag, leaving smudges but earning a relieved nod from a passing city inspector. The absence of mirrors has birthed a certain shabbiness, a dimming of spirit that lingers like smoke. You see it on every face, the suspicion, the second-guessing. Without a reflection, vanity is no longer a sin, it's a memory. People touch their faces absently, fidget with their clothes, tug at hats, but there's no way to be sure how they look anymore. Mainstream fact: mirrors were status symbols in the Middle Ages and Renaissance, rare luxuries that indicated wealth and refinement. Even a small glass mirror could cost a minor fortune. Removing them stripped away more than just vanity, it erased a key piece of social identity. Historians still argue whether the Queen's ban was a blow against inequality or merely collateral damage from her personal vendetta. Some propose it was a calculated attempt to destabilize the vanity of the nobility, forcing humility. Others see it simply as insecurity writ large across a kingdom. A quirky tidbit: in one particularly creative act of rebellion, a group of tailors in the capital city began stitching tiny reflective beads, so small they escaped notice, into the hems of garments. They called it whispered sparkle. Of course, once the Queen's inspectors caught on, the crackdown was brutal and the beads were confiscated by the barrelful. You duck into a baker's shop for warmth and the comfort of fresh bread. Behind the counter, the baker wears a flower-streaked apron and a nervous smile. As he wraps a loaf for you, he leans close and whispers, "You heard about the secret mirrors, haven't you?" You feign ignorance. "They say there's a place, down by the river, where you can see your reflection. Safe, quiet, no patrols." You leave the shop with your loaf and 1,000 questions, the warm bread tucked under your arm and the baker's words burning a hole in your mind. The streets are grayer now. Without reflections, even the marketplace has lost its luster. Merchants who once polished their wares to gleaming perfection now leave them dull and dusty. Jewelry sellers turn to matte stones and rough metal. Cobbler shops no longer bother with shiny buckles. It's as if the world itself has agreed to dim, to blur. You pass a group of children playing in the gutter. One boy holds a puddle still with his hands, and for a fleeting moment, you catch his reflection, upside down, blurry, wild-haired and grinning. He giggles, and a girl shoves him away, disrupting the puddle. It strikes you then, even when forbidden, reflections find a way. You clutch the loaf tighter and move on, mindful of watchful eyes. The Queen's inspectors are everywhere, dull badges pinned to their cloaks, faces pinched with suspicion. They roam the streets with clubs and scrolls, taking notes, issuing fines, dragging offenders away. At the far end of the square, a man stands shouting about the dangers of reflections, his voice shrill and desperate. He rails about demons slipping through glass, about the Queen's divine wisdom in banning mirrors. A small crowd gathers, more out of curiosity than belief. You watch quietly, knowing full well that fear is the Queen's sharpest tool. Not just fear of punishment, but fear of yourself, of your face, of being caught looking. You head back toward the palace, feeling the weight of the day settle on your shoulders. The kingdom beyond the walls has become a house of shadows, its people moving without seeing themselves, growing unsure, fading. And at the heart of it all, the Queen sits on her tarnished throne, unreflected, untouched, unchallenged. At least for now. You're summoned again, this time to the Queen's private chambers. Not the grand throne room or the somber salons filled with portraits, but the inner sanctum where few are permitted to tread. The corridors narrow as you approach, the stone colder, the air heavier. Servants scurry by with heads bowed, balancing trays of potions and silks and strange herbal concoctions. You step through the final door, heart thudding, and there she is, the Queen, seated before a sprawling vanity stripped bare of its mirror. It's an odd sight. A table crowded with combs, powders, unguents, tiny jars of crushed flowers and ground minerals, but no reflection to judge their effect. Only the Queen, staring into a blank wall, methodically dragging a comb through her dark hair. You shift awkwardly at the door until she flicks her fingers, a gesture for you to enter. You creep closer, careful not to meet her eyes. She's older than the portraits, of course. Lines frame her mouth and eyes, delicate but unmistakable. A thin crescent scar curves along her jawline, almost hidden by the candlelight. You wonder if she remembers what she looks like at all. She begins her beauty routine, and you're struck by its precision. Without mirrors, it's all muscle memory now. The dusting of powder, the careful daub of rose on the cheeks, the smoothing of balm across her lips. Movements practiced 1,000 times, movements executed blind. Mainstream fact, cosmetics in the Renaissance were often lethal. Women used lead-based powders for pale complexions, belladonna drops to dilate their pupils, mercury-laden creams to smooth their skin. Beauty wasn't just superficial, it was dangerous. Historians still argue whether the Queen's rigorous beauty routine was stubborn vanity or a final grasp at control. Did she paint her face for the court's benefit, or for her own? Was it defiance against aging, or simply a ritual to ward off the encroaching void she created? A quirky tidbit, lacking mirrors, some nobles began relying on detailed verbal descriptions from servants to guide their grooming. Your left braid hangs longer, or the kohl is smudged on your right eye. Some historians joke it turned the royal chambers into elaborate games of charades. You watch in silence as a maid enters carrying a silver bowl of water, carefully dulled on the outside to prevent reflections. The Queen dips her fingers, rinses them delicately, dries them on a cloth so fine it's nearly transparent. Then, something curious. She reaches under the table and pulls out a wooden box, worn at the edges. She lifts the lid, and there, tucked into velvet lining, is a shard of mirror no bigger than a hand. Cracked, worn, but still capable of catching the flicker of a face. Your breath catches. She holds it carefully, angling it just so, peering into it for the briefest moment. You can see it reflected there, the Queen's eye, sharp and assessing, one corner of her mouth drawn tight in dissatisfaction. Then she snaps the lid shut and slides the box away. You stand frozen, knowing better than to react. The Queen meets your gaze for a heartbeat, a dangerous, electric pause, and then dismisses you with another flick of her hand. You retreat, heart hammering, mind racing. Even she, the Queen who banned mirrors, who decreed reflections treasonous, even she cannot quite let go. Outside the chamber, the air feels lighter, as though the walls themselves had been holding their breath. You lean against the cool stone and think about the shard, the secret defiance hidden within her most private space. You think about how, no matter how many mirrors she smashed, some part of her still needed to see herself. And you wonder if it's her greatest vanity, or her greatest vulnerability. You wander the palace later that night, long after the last candle has guttered out and the cold stone corridors has settled into uneasy silence. The only sound is the muted shuffle of your footsteps and the faint creak of wooden beams high overhead. The queen sleeps, or pretends to. You can never be certain with her. But the rest of the palace is still very much awake, in its own secretive way. You find yourself drawn toward the unused wings, the forgotten hallways that smell of damp fabric and dust. And it's here, amid the shuttered windows and crumbling tapestries, that you stumble upon something you weren't meant to see. A door, slightly ajar, with a faint glow seeping through the crack. You push it open with the gentlest nudge and step inside. It's a storage room, or was. Crates are stacked haphazardly, some burst open, their contents spilling onto the floor. Broken furniture, discarded paintings, splintered frames. And mirrors. Not pristine mirrors, no. These are fragments, slivers, splinters. Some pieces as small as a thumbnail, others large enough to catch a glimpse of a hand or an eye. They lie scattered like fallen stars, their surfaces dulled with dust but still, defiantly, reflective. Someone has been hiding them. You crouch, brushing your fingers lightly over a shard. It's cool against your skin. You tilt it, catching the faintest glimpse of your eye, wide, cautious, a glint of candlelight flickering there. You realize that you're not alone. From the shadows, a figure steps forward, bundled in a heavy cloak. It's a young woman, face shadowed, hands tucked deep into her sleeves. She raises one finger to her lips, warning you to silence. Then she kneels beside the scattered mirrors and begins gathering them carefully, wrapping each shard in scraps of cloth and tucking them into a worn leather satchel. You recognize her now, a lady-in-waiting from the queen's outer circle. Quiet, unremarkable. The kind of person you'd overlook in a crowd. She catches your eye and, after a moment's hesitation, speaks in a whisper, "They can't all be destroyed." Mainstream fact. Throughout history, banned or suppressed items, books, artworks, religious relics, have always found protectors. Underground networks spring up, preserving what official decrees seek to erase. Mirrors, it seems, are no different. Historians still argue whether these hidden mirror collections were acts of resistance or simple nostalgia. Some argue they were tools for future rebellion, others believe they were kept as relics of a past life, memories trapped in glass. A quirky tidbit, it's said that some rebels crafted mirror mosaics out of fragments, piecing together crude reflections in secret rooms. These patchwork mirrors were hidden behind false walls, uncovered only by those who knew where to look. The young woman finishes packing the satchel and looks at you, her eyes fierce. "We keep them," she says, "because one day, she won't be here. And when that day comes, people will need to remember what they look like." You nod, your throat dry. She slips away into the shadows, and you don't follow. Instead, you sit there for a long moment, staring at the shards strewn across the floor, the broken reflections catching the candlelight in flashes of gold and silver. You wonder how many others are hoarding these forbidden fragments. How many secret collections lie hidden in attics and cellars, waiting, not for vanity's sake, but for identity's. Because without mirrors, without the simple, human ritual of seeing oneself, what's left? You rise slowly, your knees stiff, and pick up one more shard before slipping out the door. You tuck it into your sleeve alongside the tiny mirror from the smuggler. As you make your way back to your chamber, you feel the weight of it pressing against your skin, a small, sharp reminder that no matter how deep the queen's fear runs, reflection cannot be banished entirely. It only waits, biding its time. You wake the next morning to a rare commotion outside the palace gates. Word has reached the court, foreign envoys have arrived. They come cloaked against the chill, their carriages creaking, their banners limp in the cold breeze. You press yourself against a column in the courtyard, watching as they dismount, stretch stiff limbs, and exchange wary glances at the palace looming ahead. Visitors from other lands, ambassadors, dignitaries, traders, accustomed to grand, gleaming halls and glittering feasts. They expect splendor. They expect mirrors. You smile grimly. They're in for a surprise. Inside, the palace prepares a welcome feast, but it's a pale imitation of former glory. The great hall is stripped of its sparkle. Dull tapestries hang heavy on the walls where mirrors once caught and multiplied the candlelight. Silverware is unpolished, the chandeliers are deliberately dimmed, and even the goblets are matte pewter. The envoys enter and pause, confusion flickering across their faces. You can almost hear the unspoken questions. "Why so grim? Why so gray? Mainstream fact: in Renaissance courts, the impression made on foreign dignitaries was everything. Every detail, the food, the furnishings, the sheer splendor, was carefully curated to project power and wealth. A dull, mirrorless hall would have been seen not just as odd but as dangerously unfashionable. Historians still argue whether the Queen's refusal to accommodate her guests was a statement of sovereignty, an assertion that her kingdom played by her rules, or whether it was simple obstinance, a symptom of her growing detachment from reality. A quirky tidbit: one ambassador, flummoxed by the absence of mirrors, supposedly took to polishing his boots obsessively during his stay, using them as makeshift reflectors to adjust his elaborate mustache. The Queen's guards, unimpressed, confiscated his boots on the second day. You watch the banquet unfold, awkwardly at first. The envoys exchange stiff, overly formal greetings, their eyes darting to the blank walls, the unadorned tables. They speak in clipped tones, smiles forced. The Queen, seated in her subdued finery at the head of the table, seems utterly unfazed. She watches them as a cat might watch a roomful of nervous mice, her hands folded neatly in her lap. When one bold envoy broaches the subject delicately, "Your Majesty, the decor here is unusual," the Queen merely inclines her head and says, "Vanity is a vice unbecoming of my court." The words hang in the air, heavy and unchallenged. You catch the twitch of the envoy's mouth as he smothers a retort. Over the days that follow, the tension builds. The envoys are clearly unsettled, some more than others. Without mirrors, even these worldly visitors become uncertain, adjusting their hats and smoothing their tunics without ever knowing if they look presentable. You overhear servants whispering that one diplomat demanded a polished silver tray in his quarters, just to see if his beard was properly trimmed. He was denied, of course. It's a strange, quiet triumph for the Queen. She has extended her influence not just over her subjects, but over foreign emissaries. In her palace, her rules reign supreme. You can sense the visitors' growing discomfort, their small mistakes piling up: uneven doublets, crooked collars, lopsided braids. Their polished courtesy chips away with every passing day. You realize then that the Queen's war on mirrors is more than personal, it's political. In erasing reflections, she has stripped away a key tool of diplomacy: appearances. She has thrown her guests off balance without ever raising her voice. It's brilliant. It's petty. It's terrifying. As the envoys make their farewells, hurried, flustered, eager to leave, you can almost see the relief on their faces. They climb back into their carriages, casting furtive glances at the dull gray stone of the palace walls, perhaps wondering if they themselves are leaving a little less whole. The Queen watches their departure from a high window, expression unreadable. And you? You stand beneath that same window, feeling the tiny shard of mirror in your sleeve, its weight against your skin a secret resistance. The Queen may have dimmed the world inside her kingdom, but outside, the sunlight still shines. You slip through the palace corridors, your breath misting in the chill air as you follow the ripples of unease left by the envoy's hasty departure. Rumors cling to the stone walls like ivy. Some whisper that the Queen's mind frays at the edges, worn thin by years of ruling in shadow and silence. Others insist she is sharper than ever, a spider spinning silk snares for anyone foolish enough to underestimate her. But today, you are summoned not to observe, but to listen. The Queen's closest advisors huddle around a long oak table in the council chamber. You find a spot near the door, half shadowed by a heavy curtain. Their voices rise and fall, a tense undercurrent of fear disguised as strategy. The question before them is simple but dangerous. Was the mirror ban a petty indulgence, or a calculated move? Mainstream fact: monarchs throughout history have weaponized culture to consolidate power. Fashion, language, architecture, all carefully curated to remind subjects who ruled them. The Queen's mirror ban, however bizarre, fits a longer tradition of rulers shaping their realms not just through laws, but through the very fabric of daily life. Historians still argue whether the Queen's actions were inspired or insane. Was it truly about controlling vanity, or was it a broader stroke to destabilize the old power structures tied to appearance, nobility, youth, beauty? Some claim she stripped away mirrors to strip away status itself, making the court blind not only to their reflections but to their social hierarchies. A quirky tidbit: in some corners of the palace, the ban was embraced in unexpected ways. One ambitious servant rose quickly through the ranks, claiming he could sense beauty without sight. His secret? He memorized everyone's gait and voice. and flattered accordingly. The queen promoted him to a high position, delighting in his vision. Around the table, the advisors argue, their words sharp as daggers. She dismantled the court's vanity, says one, his robes dusty and plain. No more primping, no more preening. They focus now on deeds, not appearances. She dismantled diplomacy, counters another, younger, braver. She made us a laughingstock. Foreign courts think us backward, superstitious. A third, older voice, thick with caution, she dismantled fear of herself. Without mirrors, the people no longer see her power. The debate circles endlessly. You watch the queen herself, seated in silence at the head of the table, her fingers drumming lightly against the wood. She listens, eyes half-lidded, a cat among squabbling birds. Finally, she speaks. Mirrors breed envy. Envy breeds ambition. Ambition breeds betrayal. Her voice is calm, almost gentle. But the words drop into the room like stones into a still pond. She stands, smoothing her gown, dark wool, no gleam, no shimmer, and moves toward the tall, narrow windows. Beyond them, the gardens lie bare and frostbitten, their once lush beauty stripped to the bone. When no one sees themselves, she says, they cannot see what they lack. And when they cannot see what they lack, they cannot covet what they do not have. Silence greets her words. Even the bravest of her advisors find nothing to say. You shift, feeling the tiny shard of mirror hidden against your wrist, its sharp edge a reminder of everything she fears, and everything she tries to control. In her mind, she has snuffed out the spark of comparison, flattened the court into obedient gray. In her mind, she is the only flame left flickering in a kingdom of shadows. And perhaps she is right. But as you slip from the chamber, careful not to attract notice, you wonder, how long can one candle burn without consuming itself? The queen has won the war against reflections. Or so she believes. You awaken the next morning to an unsettling quiet. Even the usual rustle of servants and creak of the palace settling feels muted, as if the very stones are holding their breath. Something has shifted overnight. You hear the news in hushed whispers in the halls, fragments of sentences pass like contraband. There's been a backlash. Despite the queen's decrees, despite the fear, people are beginning to rebel, in small, secret ways. Not loudly, not with torches and pitchforks, but quietly, defiantly. A revolution of glances and glimpses. You see it first in the laundry room, a servant polishing a locket with a bit too much care. The silver catches the light briefly before he hides it away under a mound of linens. Later, in the kitchens, you spot a flash of polished copper at a scullery maid's hip. A mirror? No. A ladle, but one so carefully burnished it reflects like glass. She uses it not to serve soup but to tilt and catch a quick glimpse of her face. Mainstream fact, in many historical uprisings, resistance didn't start with grand battles. It began in whispers, in symbols, in small, shared defiance. Sumptuary laws, bans on books, even religious reforms often first encountered resistance through tiny, everyday rebellions. Historians still argue whether the Queen's mirror ban eventually cracked under the weight of these micro-revolts or whether it was external political pressures that forced her hand. But everyone agrees, the people did not stay compliant forever. A quirky tidbit, some of the Queen's ladies-in-waiting reportedly sewed tiny, mirror-like bits of polished mother-of-pearl into their sleeves, catching enough of their reflection to adjust a curl or dab at a crooked hem. They called it sleeve glancing, and it drove the Queen's inspectors mad. You see it elsewhere, too. An old noblewoman arrives at court with a fan so lacquered it gives off a ghostly shimmer. A page boy drops a tray and bends to pick it up, but not before sneaking a glance at his reflection in a puddle. Even the gardeners aren't immune. In the greenhouse, you catch them arranging watering basins so that the water's surface lies flat and unbroken, inviting a stolen glimpse while they work. It's not just vanity. It's identity. Without mirrors, without the casual reaffirmation of self, people have begun to feel hollow. So they fight back, not with swords or slogans, but with gleams, glints, glimmers. You think of your own shard, hidden safely in your sleeve. It's become more than a secret, it's a talisman. A piece of defiance small enough to carry, big enough to matter. One evening, as the sky bleeds into dusk and the palace settles into its nightly hush, you slip through a side corridor and into a long disused chapel. Moonlight filters through the dusty windows, silvering the air. You aren't alone. A small group has gathered, servants, minor nobles, even a few bold members of the court. They kneel before a simple basin of water, carefully stilled to a glassy surface. One by one, they lean over it, peering into their reflections, silent and reverent. You step forward, your heartbeat loud in your ears. When it's your turn, you kneel and gaze down. There you are, tired, rumpled, real. It feels like breathing after being underwater. No one speaks. They don't need to. This quiet acknowledgement of self is enough. A whisper of rebellion carried in silvered water and stolen glances. The queen's kingdom is still hers by day. But by night, in places like this, people reclaim the smallest, most vital piece of themselves. You leave the chapel with your head high and your shard tucked safely away, the reflection of the moon sharp and clear in your memory. The queen can ban mirrors. She cannot ban memory. You feel it the moment you step into the great hall, a ripple in the air, sharp and electric. Courtiers cluster in uneasy knots, whispering behind their sleeves, their glances darting toward the throne where the queen sits, still unstatuesque in her dark velvet gown. But it's not the queen they're staring at. It's what rests, gleaming defiantly, at the center of the room. A mirror. Tall, wide, framed in intricate gold leaf. Unmistakable. You freeze, heart pounding. How it got there, who dared to place it, you don't know. But there it stands, bold as sunlight, reflecting the queen's court in all its muted grayness. At first, no one moves. The queen herself seems carved from stone, her hands tightening on the arms of her throne. Mainstream fact, in royal courts, symbolism was a powerful weapon. To plant a mirror, a forbidden object, in the very heart of the queen's domain wasn't merely disobedience. It was a direct challenge, a scandalous slap in the face of royal authority. Historians still argue who orchestrated the rebellion. Some credit a minor noble with a long memory and a short temper. Others claim it was a conspiracy of servants, the silent hands who had suffered most under the queen's petty tyranny. Whoever it was, their message was clear, reflections were back. A quirky tidbit, according to one gossipy court diary, the queen's face, reflected in that rogue mirror, was said to have paled not with fear, but with fury so profound it seemed to suck the very light from the room. You can feel it, too, the tension, thick and choking. Some courtiers edge backward, desperate to avoid the queen's gaze. Others stare at the mirror as if it might shatter under the weight of their collective dread. The queen rises slowly, a movement so deliberate it feels volcanic, gathering force. She descends the dais step by step, each footfall echoing in the cavernous hall. The hem of her gown whispers along the floor, a black tide. You wonder if she will call for the guards, have the mirror smashed, drag some unfortunate soul away in chains. But she doesn't. She stops before the mirror and stares. You hold your breath. In the glass, her reflection gazes back, not the ageless beauty of her portraits, not the stern mask she presents to her court. Just her. Lines, weariness, humanity. All of it. Honest and unfiltered. For a heartbeat, she does nothing. Then she lifts a hand, trembling slightly, and touches the mirror's surface. A single fingertip against the glass. You're too far away to see her expression clearly, but you think you catch something flicker across her face. Grief? Regret? Recognition? She turns away abruptly, skirts swirling. Remove it, she says, voice low but razor-sharp. Two guards step forward, hesitating, clearly aware of the mirror's dangerous symbolism. But orders are orders. They grasp the frame and wrestle it from its stand. The mirror tilts dangerously, glass rattling, but somehow they manage to carry it from the room without shattering it. The queen returns to her throne, her face an inscrutable mask once more. And the court exhales. You blend into the crowd as the courtiers disperse, their whispers already growing. No one says it aloud, but everyone knows, something has shifted. The queen, once unchallengeable, has been forced to see herself again. It's a small crack in her armor, but cracks spread. Later, you slip down a servant's corridor and find the mirror propped against a wall, abandoned. You can't resist. You step closer, gaze into its depths. There you are. Changed. Wiser, maybe. Certainly less afraid. You press your palm lightly against the glass, feeling the cold bite of it. In that moment, you understand, reflections are dangerous not because they show you your flaws, but because they show you your truth. And truth, once glimpsed, is a hard thing to forget. The queen can ban mirrors. She can smash glass and silence protest. But she can't unsee. And she can't make you forget. You drift through the palace corridors in the following days, attuned to the change like a sailor sensing a shift in the wind. It's subtle, no banners unfurled, no trumpets blaring. Just a difference in the way people move, the way they look at one another, the way they carry themselves. A crack, once made, is hard to seal. You catch snippets of conversation as you pass through the shadowed halls. The queen's reflection in the forbidden mirror, was she horrified? Was she moved? The theories bloom like night flowers, vibrant in the dark. You find yourself lingering near the royal library one afternoon, where scholars pore over dusty tomes. Among the brittle pages, you overhear a heated debate. Mainstream fact, historians love a mystery, and the Queen's mirror ban has been no exception. Some contemporary scholars documented the ban with painstaking detail, while others dismissed it as palace gossip inflated by time. Official records are frustratingly vague, deliberate censorship or simple erasure, no one knows for sure. Even now, historians still argue, was the Queen a tyrant shackled by her vanity, or a ruler ahead of her time, dismantling society's shallow obsessions? Did she fear the mirror, or wield it with precision to reshape her kingdom? One scholar points out that the ban on mirrors coincided with a decline in courtly intrigue and public scandal. Another argues that the absence of reflection didn't eliminate vanity, it simply made it more dangerous, more desperate, driving it underground. You slip between rows of crumbling books and overhear one last theory, half joking, half serious. The Queen, they say, didn't ban mirrors out of fear of her own reflection. She banned them because she saw something else there. Something only she could see. A quirky tidbit, some French historians suggest the Queen believed mirrors could reveal the soul's true nature. They whisper of secret experiments, candlelit rooms filled with mirrors, and the Queen standing alone in the center, searching for, what? Redemption? Damnation? You leave the library with your head buzzing, the theories weaving themselves into new possibilities. The Queen, that grim monarch who has shaped every inch of her kingdom to her own bruised image, remains an enigma. That evening, you find yourself drawn once more to the old disused chapel where, under the cover of night, the quiet rebellion continues. The basin still sits at the center, its water still unglassy. Around it kneel a half-dozen familiar faces, the laundress who hid silver lockets, the kitchen maid who polished her ladle, the gardener who left puddles undisturbed. You kneel with them, your sleeve brushing the cold stone, your hidden shard of mirror pressing against your wrist. One by one, they gaze into the basin. No words are spoken. None are needed. This is a ritual now, sacred in its defiance, humble in its power. When your turn comes, you lean forward and see yourself. There's a new hardness in your eyes, a quiet resilience. You think of the Queen, of her lonely defiance, her desperate grip on a kingdom she cannot control forever. You wonder, does she ever sneak a glance into that secret shard hidden in her chambers? Does she see the cracked spiderwebbing through her own reflection, through her rule? The Queen has banished mirrors. But she cannot ban memory. And she cannot ban the restless human need to know oneself. The rebellion is slow, patient. No fanfare, no declarations. Just glances, fragments, reflections pieced back together one stolen glimpse at a time. The Queen may still sit on her tarnished throne, but her kingdom is no longer hers alone. It belongs, too, to those who remember. To those who reflect. You tread carefully now through the palace that feels more mausoleum than home. The silence hangs heavier these days, like the last breath held before a storm. The courtiers move like shades, their once grand silks reduced to wool and their jewels traded for dull iron. Yet under this veil of austerity, something flickers, an ember refusing to die. The Queen still rules. Still holds court in her mirrorless halls. But even you can see it, the sheen of her power, once blinding, has dulled. And she knows it. A summons comes unexpectedly. You are to attend her in her private study, a room few are ever invited to enter. When you arrive, she sits alone, no attendants, no guards. The fireplace crackles low, casting shadows that dance along the walls. On the table before her lies the wooden box you recognize immediately, the one cradling her secret shard of mirror. She doesn't acknowledge you at first. Just studies the box with an expression you can't quite read. Weary, resigned. I used to be afraid of it, she says finally, voice soft as ash. The mirror. You stand frozen, unsure whether to speak. I thought, if I could rid the world of reflections, I could rid myself of them, too. The lines. The decay. The disappointment. Her fingers traced the grain of the wood, slow, methodical. But I was wrong. Mainstream fact. Throughout history, rulers who attempted to control perception, be it through censorship, propaganda, or sheer brute force, found that human memory and desire have a resilience beyond laws. People find ways to remember, to resist, even when every visible trace is erased. Historians still argue about the Queen's endgame. Some suggest she was trying to reshape society, remove the shackles of vanity and status. Others claim she simply wanted to vanish, piece by piece, into a world that would not reflect her fading image. A quirky tidbit, in later years, legends sprung up around the Queen, claiming she became a ghost, haunting the mirrorless halls, searching for a reflection she had long since forgotten. You remain silent as the Queen finally lifts the box's lid. The shard gleams faintly in the firelight, edges dulled but surface still clear enough to catch her image. She leans forward, slowly, until her face hovers above the glass. You watch as her features settle into the reflection, the creases, the faded brilliance, the undeniable truth of herself. For a long, breathless moment, she stares. Then she closes the lid with a soft click and sits back, as if the weight of a kingdom has settled fully on her shoulders at last. She turns her gaze to you, sharp and unflinching. "Do you know what it is to live without seeing yourself?" she asks. You shake your head. Words fail you. "It is to live untethered," she says. "To drift." She waves a hand, weary. "I thought I was freeing the world. I was only losing myself." You want to say something, anything, but what is there to say to a woman who has spent years erasing herself one mirror at a time? At length, she stands. Not with the commanding snap of her younger days, but slowly, carefully, like a ship righting itself after a long, hard voyage. "You may go," she says. A dismissal, but not unkind. You bow and back away, leaving her alone with the shard in the crackling fire. Outside the study, the palace feels different. Not lighter, exactly, but less stifling. The courtiers still whisper and shuffle, but there's an undercurrent now, a quiet boldness threading through the halls. You hear it in the footsteps of a lady-in-waiting who no longer checks the ground before she walks. You see it in the straightened back of a servant polishing a candlestick just a little too bright. The Queen's grip has slipped, just a fraction. And in that gap, the court breathes. You slip your shard from your sleeve and hold it to the light. Your reflection, faint but firm, meets your gaze. The Queen may have banned mirrors. She may have banished reflections. But some truths, some selves, cannot be erased. You find yourself walking the palace grounds as twilight deepens, the last golden rays filtering through bare branches and casting long shadows across frost-hardened earth. The kingdom feels changed, an echo of its former grandeur, yet alive with something fragile, something new. Mirrors have returned, slowly, cautiously. Not in grand halls or glittering ballrooms, but in quiet corners, behind locked doors, tucked away in drawers. Fragments pieced together by rebels of reflection, by those who refuse to forget. You glimpse a servant's smile catching in a polished silver spoon, a child's wide eyes reflected in a rain-dappled puddle, a noblewoman's glance at a tiny glass shard hidden in her sleeve. Mainstream fact. Throughout history, objects banned by tyrants often become symbols of resistance and identity. Mirrors, in this story, are more than glass, they are acts of defiance, of memory, of reclaiming selfhood. Historians still debate the lasting impact of the Queen's reign. Was she a cautionary tale of vanity run wild? A visionary who sought to remake society? Or simply a ruler undone by her own insecurities? A quirky tidbit, folk tales spun in the centuries that followed tell of the Queen's ghost wandering the palace, searching for her lost reflection, forever trapped between shadow and light. You stop by a small pond at the edge of the garden. The surface is still unclear, reflecting the stars beginning to prick the dusk sky. You lean over, gazing into the water. There you see yourself, tired, weathered, but unmistakably real. A face shaped by hardship, by resistance, by the quiet courage to be seen. The Queen's mirror ban was born from a petty grudge, a bruised ego, a fear of truth. But the kingdom's story is not one of erasure. It is one of reflection, broken, fragmented, and yet whole. As the night deepens and the stars will overhead, you take a slow, steady breath. The Queen may have banned mirrors. She may have shattered glass in silence. But the human spirit? That is a reflection no ruler can ever banish. You turn away from the pond, the cool night air brushing your face like a whispered promise. The mirrors will never truly be gone. They will live in memories, in stories, in every stolen glance and every shard carefully hidden away. And as you walk back toward the castle, you feel the weight of history in your bones, and the light of reflection in your heart. Sweet dreams!